we put some interfaces in some switch ports. It says to do port security, which port security will control the MAC addresses of which machines can connect to any particular interface. So to configure that, we need to go to the each particular interface. All right, and configure it. So there's 3 different modes for port security. There is protect, restrict, and shut down. Protect will discard traffic from an invalid MAC address. So what we'll do is we'll configure the MAC address we want to connect to that switch port. Protect will discard the traffic. Restrict will discard the traffic and will send log and SNMP messages. So if you're monitoring some logs or you have an SNMP host that's receiving messages, then it will alert you that it's taken an action. And then shutdown will do those things. It will discard the offending traffic. It will send log and SNMP messages, and it will shut down the port completely. So if you have multiple machines hanging off of that one interface, it will shut down the port completely. So to enable port security, we're going, well, first let's connect a couple more PCs. So I'm going to put two PCs in VLAN 2. So we'll give this one 192.168.2.2. Alright, we're on the same subnet, so we don't need a gateway. We're not going to have a gateway yet. I'll make this one 2.3. Alright, then we'll connect them, which I should have done first, so we don't have to wait for spanning tree, which we'll learn about next week. I did ports 3 through 10 in VLAN 2. That's not what I wanted. So these PCs are both in VLAN 2, so I'll be able to ping once this turns green. So we'll wait for that to happen. Alright, that one's green, so it'll be green in a second. So we'll ping, what are we going to ping? 192.168.2.3. That machine is in the same VLAN. I can ping that. 1.1, that was our switch VLAN 1 interface. Even though we're connected to the switch, we're not in the same subnet. We're in a different VLAN, so we cannot connect to the switch, in case you're trying to do that from one of these PCs. So that is basic connectivity. So let's look at, does that work? The MAC address. To get the MAC address in the simulator, there we go. To get the MAC address in the simulator, you can put a space, all, and that'll work. So here's my MAC address. We might need that later. So first thing we're going to do is, not the first thing, we're going to enable port security on the switch ports. So first thing we need to do is go into the switch port we want to configure. So we're going to do, we configured port 3 and 4, I believe. Yeah, 3 and 4. So interface FA0/3. Remember, you can abbreviate those things. First thing we need to do is make it an access interface. Even though we have entered the command switch port mode access VLAN 3, that just puts it into access VLAN 3. We need to actually hard code it as an access interface. When we get to the part where we talk about trunking and stuff, we'll better understand what this means. Switch port mode access. Switch. Maybe I should spell. Switch. Okay, that's enough of the command. It's SW. Switch port mode access makes it an access interface. That is a prerequisite for enabling port security. Then we need to enable port security. Switch port security. This turns port security on. These two commands are required, and lots of times people go through and put in the switch port security configurations to specify the MAC address and the protection mode, but then they don't actually ever enable port security. So if you don't type in switch port security is not on, regardless of what other commands you put in there. So required commands are to specify what the MAC address is. If you are configuring the switch for the first time and you want it to learn the MAC address that is connected to it, you can use the sticky command, port MAC address, switch port security, MAC address, sticky. And basically what happens with this is the switch port will learn what MAC address is connected to it just by listening. So let me go over to our PC and send some traffic again. So now if we go look at our running config on our switch, look at our running config. If we get down here to interface 3, I put sticky in there, and then it learned the MAC address that is connected. So once you get the MAC addresses, then you can copy it over to a permanent setting if you so choose. The other way you can enter the MAC address is by specifying it directly. So we can do that with, instead of doing that, we could put 0090.2118.7756. So it didn't like that because there was already that in there, I guess, is the only thing I can think. So let's do a no. Put a no in front of that to get rid of that, and then try our command again. And that time it worked. So let's get rid of the sticky altogether. So that way, if you have a list of the devices that are configured and you want to hard code it in there, you can do that. There are a couple of settings that are optional. If you want to configure the maximum number of MAC addresses that can connect, you can do switch port security, maximum, and then put 1. So if you know there should only be one MAC address on any particular port, then you can do this. That will prevent somebody from coming in and putting another switch outside of your switch port or a hub or something and piggybacking onto the network. Another thing you can do is you can change the violation mode. So I talked briefly a little earlier about the different violation modes. Shutdown is the default, I believe. Yeah, shutdown is the default. So if you don't specify anything, it's going to do shutdown, which is the most restricted behavior. You can also do protect, or you can do restrict. So what would that do? Well, protect and restrict would both drop the traffic without shutting down the port. Restrict would also send some log and SNMP messages. So the lab sheet says to exercise these options. So what you should do is you should configure it so that, for example, PCB's MAC address is connected for switch port 3, for example, and make sure that works, and then move your cable so that port PC3 is plugged into PC2's switch port, right? So right now this should work. This should work because it's set up properly. However, if we delete these cables reconnect it backwards. So we connect PC2. Sorry, oh, that's not what I wanted. PC2 to port 3 and PC1 to port 4. Now it shouldn't work. We gotta wait for it to turn green again, so make sure you're taking your time on these activities. Now it should not work because this MAC address is not gonna match what is in the config. So hopefully it doesn't work when it starts up. And when I say starts up, I mean when spanning tree is done doing the spanning tree-ness of spanning tree. So now if I ping the ping I was doing, right, this ping worked a minute ago, well now the return traffic should be blocked, so it shouldn't work. Right, so cool. I can't ping just like I'm not supposed to. If you notice, the interface is still green because we had the violation mode as restrict. If you look here, actually that doesn't matter. We had to restrict. If we change it to shutdown, oh, this is pretty tricky. I'm glad I decided to do this. If you change it to shutdown and ping, now it should shut the interface down. Hey, look, the interface is red. It's shut down. If you go look in the config, you can run the command show port security port dash security int fa0/3. Show port security. Did I spell that wrong? All right. Show port. Oh, so apparently that command is not going to work, which is weird because it's letting me set port security, but it's not letting me show it. Another reason we're using real equipment for this lab. So anyway, if you do show port security interface fa0/3, then that should show you some stuff. You can look in the book to see what it should show you, but it should show you that the port is shut down. So then the only way to unshut down the port, if the port shut down due to port security, the way you unshut down the port is you do shutdown. You actually go in and shut it down. And then you do a no shutdown to bring it back up. Added on and has been removed. So there, it's doing the spanning tree nonsense again. It's orange. It'll come back up green, and then if we ping again, it'll go down again. So that was port security at a glance. Another switch command we like to run, or I like to run sometimes. If you're on a network with a lot of switches and you're trying to figure out a problem, you're trying to figure out the flow of how the packets are flowing through the network, you will want to know what your switch is doing with the packets. And if you run the command show MAC address table, if you run that command, it shows you which interfaces are connected to which ports. So let's go back in and do something first to make that more useful. So I just turned port security off, so now my ping should work again. Assuming I didn't already shut the port down. So yeah, so now my ping's working. So if we look at the config, for fun, let's just look at this. If you look, I took all the stuff out. Never mind. So anyway, let's look at the MAC address table. So now it shows which interface particular MAC addresses are connected to. So if you're trying to troubleshoot a layer 2 problem, it's good to know which VLANs are in any particular or associated with any particular port, and the MAC addresses that are associated with that. So, for example, if you know the MAC address of the destination machine, you can look in the MAC address table in the switch to see which interface is getting forwarded out, and make sure, based on your analysis of the network, that that is a switch port it is supposed to be getting forwarded out. So, I think that's it for this part.